Welcome to Majesty and Mystery of Crop Circles. My name is John Root. I'm a naturalist and educator. I begin all of my programs with the following statement. We acknowledge that we live on land that was managed and inhabited before European colonization. Please take a moment to find your location on the map and honor those whose land we now occupy. And actually, the first slide has to do with a Native American tradition called Magic Circle in the Prairie, which is a story told by the Shawnee, the Algonquin, the Chippewa, and in every one of them, it involves a man who's an excellent hunter and well-known in his tribe, and he finds a circle out there in the prairie that shows no signs of, no explanation of how it was flattened. There's no footsteps leading to it. He has no idea of how it was flattened, but it's a perfect circle. And then he hears this beautiful music, and then he sees a large basket coming down into the circle. There are 7 beautiful women who are singing, and then they step out of, when the basket touches down, they step out of the basket and they dance. They dance in such a way that this brave has never seen anyone dance before. Of course, he falls deeply in love with the youngest, because it's always the youngest in these legends, right? And they all they head up after they're done. They get back in the basket and they rise up. So he wants the next night. They return, into the sky. He comes back the next night, and sure enough, there they are. And there are different versions of this, but it involves, of course, as you can imagine, a romance between this brave and the woman he has fallen in love with. I'll leave you, if you want to find out more, you can do a search for Henry Schoolcraft, Magic Circle in the Prairie. But this is the book that I read about 15 years ago, around 2006 or so. I found it on a friend's kitchen table, and I was intrigued. Secrets in the Fields. I'd kind of heard about crop circles, but I didn't know anything about them. I thought, well, maybe people are out there making them. But when I read this book by Freddie Silva, it became immediately clear to me that people cannot make these formations. And Freddie's book is all about the drama that happened, that had to do with people who are trying to study it seriously, and how there were various entities in society that were trying to spread disinformation and intimidate those people who are trying to research it. But truly a fascinating book, and I highly recommend it. And there are a number of others. But let me begin with a definition of crop circles. You can call them organized patterns or sophisticated patterns of flattened and swirled plants, manifesting mysteriously in crops and other vegetation. And we can think of this as part of a larger category of pteroglyphs, sophisticated designs manifesting mysteriously anywhere, on bodies of water or on land. For example, how about this? In mid-1970s, a perfect circle of ice in British Columbia. Now, not only do we have these legends from Midwestern United States, from those Native American tribes, but here we have a fellow named Robert Platt, who is a naturalist. You can see he's I don't think he was roaming the countryside in this getup, but that's his portrait anyway. And he wrote a book called Natural History of Staffordshire, and you can see these illustrations of designs that he found. Okay, now these are not circles, are they? But we still are going to call them crop circles, because that's what people refer to them as. And he found more than 50 crop circles. He also interviewed farmers and heard their stories. So he had second-person accounts of a number of other crop circles besides the ones he saw personally. And he saw a variety of shapes, circles with squares, circle rings, spirals. He noticed that the animals stayed away from them, that wild animals and domesticated animals didn't want to be anywhere near where a crop circle formation was about to happen or had already happened. He also noticed that the soil was dramatically drier in the formation compared to what it was before the crop or the plants had been flattened. And he at times found a white sulfurous soil residue that, that made people sick when they tasted it. Remarkably, he noticed that when he came back to the same spot the next year, the plants were growing much more vigorously, as much as 30% increases in crop yields where there had been a crop circle. And incidentally, all of these phenomena have also been documented in modern times. So now Robert Platt had some ideas about, I mean, of course he was a naturalist, he wanted to understand and he wanted to offer a reason for he considered elves and dancing witches because, you know, he was a person of his time, right? It occurred to him that there might be some biological agents, such as deer or the way mosses were growing, but neither one of those was really satisfying to him. So now look at this one, a circle with a square in the middle. And I quote Robert Platt, "Must needs be the effects of lightning exploded from the clouds." In other words, he imagined the clouds forming at first into a circle and then into a square and lightning passing through both of them. And there's his illustration. And I mean, we can shake our heads and wonder how in the world he could come up with, you know, how he could imagine such a thing could happen in nature. But that was the best he could do. And in this case, right, the clouds breaking first into quadrangular and after in a white circular form. Now, this is the earliest photograph I have of a crop circle, 1966, but there are reports of crop formations happening earlier. Incidentally, virtually all the photos I have in this presentation are of crop circles in southern England. That does not mean that they don't happen here in the United States or Canada or in Europe or elsewhere in the world. They do. But there's a reason why I'm focusing on southern England, because the most crop circles, and also usually the most impressive and spectacular and the largest formations, invariably happen every year in southern England. So it's a very British phenomenon. So yes, farmers remember, yes, when we were children, we used to play in them. Them meaning the crop circles, right? And back then they were circles. Oh, I already showed this slide, so let me move on. There we have a farmer's wife and their two daughters leaving one of 5 circles, large circles, as you can see, in their field. If you roll a die and you get the number 5, you can imagine that was the arrangement of those 5 circles. Now let's think about what a circle is and what it might stand for, because people in every culture through the eons have regarded geometry as being sacred and the natural world as being expressing sacred geometry. And a circle is often considered to be a symbol of ineffable oneness, the indivisible fulfillment of the universe. And a sphere is referred to or thought of as the ultimate expression of unity, completeness, and integrity. So you see how a circle, which of course is a two-dimensional representation of a sphere, and a sphere, both are highly regarded as having very deep sacred meaning and giving us a kind of a orientation of ourselves to the sacred. And so perhaps we should think of even these very first crop formations as having meaning to us and being gifts to us in terms of reminding us to reconnect with that sacred part of ourselves and our sacred beliefs. Well, here's one where there's 2 smaller circles flanking a larger one. I should explain that these parallel lines that you see in many of these photographs are called tram lines in Britain. A tram is a truck. In Britain, they use trucks to spray their fields, and so they don't want to drive their trucks everywhere, so they have defined lanes for the trucks to go. And that gives you a sense of scale. The width of those 2 lines is the width of the chassis of the truck. So in this case, the crop formation was laid right along the tram lines. But in this case, there are no tram lines in this field, are there? And yet there's no sign of entry into the field, no evidence that any person had come in or team of people and made them. The A272, the name of the road, became clogged up for hours each evening with cars pulling off the road as families would park up and spend the evenings staring down into the field and chatting about every mystery the universe held. You can imagine just how fascinated people were when they kept seeing more and more of these symbols being manifest on the landscape. Here's another one, a very similar, a Celtic cross, and none other than the Deputy Prime Minister's wife saw a bright red light over this area. I don't know if it was before, during, or after the crop formation. And here's another one just like that. And the point I want to make about this is that you see there's a sloping hill where it occurred. And you would see the perfect circles if you were seeing them from the air. But if you were on the ground and measuring them, you would measure ellipses. You would not measure perfect circles. That seems to me to be an indication that they are being made from the air. That's a logical, to me, a logical assumption to make about that the energy that causes the plants to lie down in these neat circles is coming from above. And in this case, remember Roger Platt's strange white substance? A strange white substance was found in this formation. Everyone who smelled it experienced severe chest complaints. Now we have the next level of sophistication, not a simple circle, but a ring surrounding the circle, in fact, 3 of them in one field at Cheesefoot Head in Hampshire County, England. Hampshire and Wiltshire counties are the 2 counties in southern England where the most crop circles have traditionally been seen. And here, remember the pteroglyphs, not just on land, but in water, sometimes they are snow formations. But in this case, another ice circle, and you can see the people on that far rim for scale. And how in the world would that free-floating disk of ice have been created? And in fact, how is it staying so perfectly centered? Would be another question. Well, here we have 2 rings, and an extremely large geomagnetic disturbance was detected the night that this formation was created in 1988. Now, a fellow named Gerald Hawkins decided that he would investigate this phenomenon, among other people, but Gerald Hawkins happens to be an American citizen. He was head of the astronomy department at Boston University. He wrote the book Stonehenge Decoded, and as you can see on the slide, he discovered that Stonehenge and demonstrated, he was quite convinced that Stonehenge was a sophisticated observatory that our ancestors built millennia ago, that served as an astronomical calendar and was used as a computer to predict eclipses. You can see what it looked like in the lower left before it became the ruins that it is today. Now, scientists often do the simplest things first, and Gerald Hawkins decided that he would measure all the circles that had happened so far, because he would investigate. I mean, a lot of the circles had already been measured by other people, so he decided to look at those numbers, and what he realized was that they had very orderly relationships to each other. In other words, the smallest one might be exactly half the size of the largest one. Well, then you have the ratio of 1 to 2, which is the same ratio that you would have of the frequency of the first note of a major scale compared to the octave above it. And da, da, I just doubled the frequency of my singing voice by jumping an octave. But if I went da, da, from the C to the G, for example, in the C major scale, that's a 50% jump in frequency, or 3/2, as you can see under G. And every one of these fractions was manifested by the crop circles when he compared them with each other. But none of the fractions that would have been associated with the notes that are not in this major scale, in this case the black keys of the C major scale, none of those ratios was discovered, only the ones of the diatonic or the major scale. That certainly is not a coincidence, and what this is demonstrating is that while we are not being told what to expect, we are being invited to discover what information is encoded in these formations. Now this one in June 1988, 3 circles, truly remarkable. It's difficult to see these 7 concentric rings and 48 spokes, but trust me, they were there. And the way that they were created, the reason that we see these spokes and rings is that there are groups of plants in each circle, small groups of plants that are bent at different levels. Some are bent at the upper node, some are bent at the middle node, and some are bent at the lower node. And the ways that they are, the groupings of those bendings is what creates that effect from above. That's the best I can describe it from what I saw in the written account of it. That is truly an amazing phenomenon. And it so happens that this same formation is one of the Euclidean theorems. There again, we have, you see the one in the upper left, and there are other theorems there that are illustrated. Every one of those theorems, incidentally, has also shown up in crop circle formations. Well, now we have a circle, but what makes this intriguing is that the crops, the plants are lying in different directions in each quadrant of that circle, except for in the middle of it. And in the middle, they are all swirled in one direction. And there's on the rim of the circle, they're swirled in the opposite direction. So there's a lot of finesse, a lot of detail in this circle. And the reason that it looks brighter in some quadrants than others, it all has to do with the angle of reflection of the sun. All these formations, of course, are meant to be seen from the air, or they are best appreciated from the air. And that's the effect that you're going to see when you're up, especially when the sun is slanting at an angle like at dawn or dusk. Cheesefoot Head, Hampshire. I love the names of these British locations. So now we're seeing rectangles as well as circles, aren't we, in the designs? And in this case, the familiar 4 satellite circles surrounding a larger one. But notice that there are very narrow bands you can think of them as orbits connecting those 4 circles. They're so narrow that if you walked in them, you would make them wider. They're just a few plants wide. That's a clear indication to me that no one made them by walking around. You wouldn't be able to do it. It's just simply impossible. And in fact, this same formation was added to subsequently. Another circle was laid down intersecting with the first one. Another one at Cheesefoot Head, Hampshire. And this design reminded some people of a vibrating tuning fork with its associated sound waves. And that it could be the message that was intended, but no one is telling us what's the right answer. No one is confirming or denying any theories about what the symbols of these formations are. This one I find kind of amusing because it was found on Telegraph Hill at Cheesefoot Head. And Telegraph Hill, you look at the formation, you imagine that there's a message beaming out from one of those circles, just as a telegraph would be a message being sent out. Now in 1990, again, we have an interesting event. This fellow, he's a farmhand, he found the formation, so he wanted his picture taken with it. And the cameraman obligingly took the picture in it. And as he was taking the picture, you see the black object there almost hit his head. I mean, it came down out of the sky and there, just fell right in front of him. And there's, again, no explanation, official explanation is given for what's happened here, although there were large quantities of metal spheres found on the edge of this field, so this wasn't an isolated incident. Could it be that the forces that were used to create the formation from above also shattered an asteroid and caused those metal spheres to fall on the edge of that field? Now, yet another circle or a formation with combined elements of circles and rectangles, including the tram lines you can see are flattened. That tram line is flattened in between those two lines. And so what we see is it looks quite orderly, but we don't really know what we're looking at until we are shown by someone who took the time to demonstrate that actually there's a complex geometrical formation that includes 3 larger circles with 5 pointed stars inscribed in each of them in ways such that every one of those 4 rectangles that you see between the dumbbell circles, every one of those 4 rectangles has corners, right? And at least one corner of each of those rectangles is touched by one of the 5 pointed stars. And also how you notice how the circles just have to be exactly the right size and the right distance from each other in order for those 5 pointed stars and the circles inscribed around them to fit just as they do. So what we're looking at now, of course, is a plan for the formation, because you don't see those extra circles and those stars. You just see the end product of them. If you want to learn more about crop circle reconstructions, go no farther than Zeph Damen's website. He is a genius. He is able to figure out virtually every formation. Just by looking at the formation, he'll deduce what the larger pattern is that was used to create the formation, and then of course he erases certain lines and leaves other lines which are part of the formation itself, and proves that his construction or his reconstruction is accurate. Sometimes these formations are simply eloquent. And by the way, this monument is called the Beware Chalk Pit Monument because there's a gentleman who owned a horse that fell 25 feet into a hole, and then the next year recovered well enough so that he won a race. But the horse was called Beware Chalk Pit, and this is a monument to him. But it seems to me that the crop formation is a monument to the monument. We have a circle, a circular ring, and then a circle in the center, which echoes the actual monument, which stands right in the center of a circle. And also in 1990, we had the appearance of something called a pictogram, a huge formation. It kept on going and going, quite long. And never before, not only are we seeing the circles and the straight lines, but we're seeing the things that look like claws or keys that are not composed of straight lines. They're kind of irregular. They're not straight lines. And this whole phenomenon is mysterious. No one has come up with a satisfactory explanation of what these formations mean. What is the interpretation? What are they symbolizing? I don't believe anyone has come up with the answer for that. This is the same formation, incidentally, seen at different angles. And here's another pictogram, the same month. People came from all over the world. They flocked to these pictograms to see them because it was just the crop circle phenomenon. And the ones that I've shown you are just representations. I mean, there were dozens and dozens that had been appearing all over the countryside. So of course, and Southern England was always the place to come to see them. So people from all over the world were just meeting inside, speaking to each other in their different tongues, but all of them just so excited and just in awe of what was happening. Now, something happened the same year in eastern Oregon, in a dry lake bed. 13 miles of lines that were 10 inches wide and 3 inches deep were chiseled mysteriously overnight. No one was seen doing it. In fact, if you had driven a truck onto that lake bed to do the diagram, your tracks would have been seen, and yet no such tracks were found. And the thing to understand about this design is that it's a traditional Hindu design called a Sri Yantra. And the function of the Sri Yantra design, as you can see, there are different versions of it, different ornamentations, but the 9 interlocking triangles are consistent with every Sri Yantra, and there's a dot right in the middle. And the idea is to focus your gaze on the center of that pattern. It's a way that well, it was considered to uplift your consciousness, to perhaps achieve enlightenment or to connect with the sacred. This was it's analogous to a mantra, which is something that one says in order to experience the sacred, but a yantra is something that one focuses one's gaze on for a similar reason. And here we had a huge formation created in the middle of the night, and incidentally, a camper in that vicinity saw a pillar of smoke the night that it was created. And speaking of special effects, imagine being the warden of Barbary Castle, and at 3:30 in the morning, you're staying awake because that's your responsibility, and you hear this colossal roar coupled with a pulsing hum, and you might wonder what in the world is going on. And the next morning, there it was. Now, the nearby village was lost its power that evening, and in fact, there was a mother and son driving that previous evening in a brightly lit silvery blue orb about 30 feet away from them as they were driving, which just made its appearance and then vanished. So this is the formation. Perhaps you recall Freddie Silva's book, the cover of Freddie Silva's book that I shared early in this program. This is the formation on the cover. And it's been studied by many people. In fact, it was studied for years afterwards. People were trying to understand exactly what that meant. But it's a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional object, the tetrahedron, most likely. You can picture like a pyramid, the tetrahedron. And a tetrahedron is considered to be an alchemical symbol, creating something magical from geometry. Well, people, of course, were quite curious and wanted to know more, and someone decided to send his own crude crop circle up to the heavens. Talk to us. He trampled out the lines. Talk to us on a field. And lo and behold, there is the reply that came immediately. I believe it was in a nearby field. Now, that sure looks like a message of some kind, doesn't it? And you can imagine people tried to interpret it. Well, remember Gerald Hawkins, the one who discovered the notes of the major scale were encoded in the sizes of the rings and the circles. He believed that this was Latin. And he found the words, "I am against acts of cunning," which would be understandable because there was a lot of misinformation going on at the time. And so that's an understandable message to receive or to be sent by the crop circle makers. Simon Burton agreed that it was in Latin, but he saw something different. He saw, "I have hidden it present." They're choosing not to show themselves for whatever reason. Michael Green thought it was Hebrew. The Creator, wise and loving, was what he saw. And a fourth person, Robert Borman, agreed that it was Hebrew, but he thought it said a new breed of people. Could it be that all four of these people are right? We're used to thinking of that, well, only one person could be right, or maybe none. But maybe all four were. Maybe the creators of this message were so had a kind of a way of conveying all four messages at once. Two of them in Latin, two of them in Hebrew. Well, there's a fellow named Mandelbrot, who was a French mathematician, very sophisticated and famous mathematician, who came up with a fractal that was based on imaginary numbers. You and I are not used to thinking that it's possible to have a square root of a negative number, but that's what he did. He was playing with those ideas, and it had to do with chaos theory. And so he's a well-known mathematician. And in 1990, scientists were saying, these formations are becoming so complex, I wouldn't be surprised to see a Mandelbrot fractal occur on the fields. And sure enough, exactly a year to the day after he made his comment, and the comment was published in a magazine, a representation, you can see it's an approximation because a true fractal has endless detail. And the closer you look at it, the more detail you see. In this case, what you see in the fields was a simplified version, and yet it still is such a sophisticated form that in order to create that level of accuracy of the representation of the Mandelbrot fractal, you would have needed to have a sophisticated computer, and there it is, Mandelbrot fractal, August 1991. Now, in light of everything you've learned, can you really believe that Doug and Dave made every crop circle to date, which is what they claim to do? In 1991, September 1991, and there it is in the newspapers, they confessed, quote unquote, that they had made all the crop circles to date. I guess they were ignorant of the ones that had been made way back in Robert Plott's time, but here's their confession, okay? They used a plank of wood, a ball of string, and a piece of wire dangling from a baseball cap to serve as a sighting device, right? Perfectly straight lines in the dead of night, right? They would have had to jump or pole vault into the standing crop because there was no sign of entry into some of these, right? And into some of these areas where the crop was flattened. Incidentally, that picture in the upper right is an example of their artwork, which is not too impressive. And their only motive was to have a laugh, right? And keep in mind, what they were doing was illegal. If they really did what they claimed they were doing. I mean, you know, crop formations, after all, are sophisticated graffiti. No farmer has given permission to have their fields used. Not only had they never been caught in the act, but their wives had never noticed that they'd been out at night. Because crop formations almost always do happen at night. And they happen regardless of the weather, even if it's raining or something, you know. Crop formations still are discovered the next morning. Well, I think it makes more sense to find out what's up with crop circles by doing real research, real scientific research. And that's exactly what BLT research has done. These are people who are devoted to, and the B stands for the John Burke, the L is W.C. Levengood, the T is Nancy Talbot. I can say that I knew Nancy Talbot in the sense that I had conversations with her on several occasions over the phone. I was very impressed with her knowledge. I considered her to be the world's foremost expert. She had a stroke, so she may not be involved anymore in this research. But at the time, I regard her as the foremost expert, and she has a scientific background, and there are many mysterious things that happened to her around the crop circle phenomenon that she never would have believed if they hadn't happened to her herself. And if you want to learn more about those experiences, I invite you to go to bltresearch.com, which is the website of this organization. But this is where to go to find scientific information such as this remarkable phenomenon of bending and elongation of stem nodes. On the left, you'll see typical stem nodes. There, you can think of them as like your elbows or your knees, right? But stems don't stretch and bend. I mean, it's just not possible to do that. You know, nature, it doesn't happen in nature, and yet in crop formations, that seems to be how, in fact, the plants are bent. The nodes become mysteriously elongated, and they're stretched differentially, right? And they're aimed in a certain way. It's not just whether they're stretched, but how, you know, what direction they're bent. That's part of the art form. This can also happen. Expulsion cavities in stem nodes. If there are plants that are left standing in the formation, those plants still might get the energy, receive the energy that's being delivered to the field, which will cause them to explode in the nodes. The steam might build up, the pressure might build up to a certain extent, where it has to escape somehow. So you see the expulsion cavities. Again, you'll never see expulsion cavities in nature. They don't happen elsewhere. Twisted seed heads have on occasion been found. And stunted corn kernels. The plants remain alive, but the corn, in this case, the crop was corn. There have been a number of different crops visited, by the way, which is itself an eloquent testament to the ability of crop circle makers to bend a variety of different kinds of plants, even corn, which you'd imagine how in the world would one do that, right? So the stunted corn kernels, in this case wheat, the stunted and seedless wheat seed heads were found in the plants, which is not surprising if this strong energy had visited them, the plants, even though they were still alive. And it would also make sense that those seeds, when planted, would be less vigorous than the controls. In the top photograph, you see the control samples, the normal healthy seeds. However, remember when Robert Platt said that he saw that he noticed a 30% increase in crop yield the next year? Well, surprisingly, even if you plant seeds from some of these plants, in this case corn, in a formation in Medina, New York, 1991, those seeds actually outperformed the controls. On the left-hand side, you'll see those are corn kernels that were harvested, and in this case, the corn kernels were clearly not stunted. It could have been because the formation happened late enough so that the corn was already mature when the formation happened. And so they were given a special boost by the energy that caused them to bend. And there was also a boost to the fertility and the vigor of the corn kernels and the edge of the formation, which you see in the middle, compared to the controls. But it wasn't as great an effect. And perhaps just as remarkably, the top photo here is what you ordinarily expect when you cast some seed on the ground, and some plants grow faster than others. You have a whole range of vigor of those seedlings. But look at the photo on the bottom. Synchronized seedling growth. Every one of the corn kernels was growing at the same rate. And now here we have the Robert Platt phenomenon the next year. Remember the 30% increased yield. There you go. The dark green is showing those plants are quite healthy where the crop formation had happened the previous year. Enhanced plant growth is documented in this photo. And yet in this photo, you can see the opposite happened. And I do not have an explanation of why it would happen one way in one place and the other way another way in another place. And I don't know if to what extent this has been researched. How often have farmers looked at the formations and noticed a difference? And is it usually what Robert Platt saw, or is this just as common that you'll see stunting of plants? Where the energy visited the field, it must have caused some changes to the soil, affecting the ability of the seeds to grow the next year. In fact, soil changes must have also caused this pattern, a ghost pattern in snow. The snow melted everywhere else except for where the corn or the crop had been laid flat by a crop circle. So we had a second appearance of the crop circle, in this case in snow. And yet in this photograph we'll see exactly the opposite phenomenon. Just like with the crop yield, we saw both results. So too can we see either accelerated or delayed snow melting, depending on which formation it was. And now here's another a look at the effects of crop formations on soil. Diane Conrad decided to investigate the degree of clay mineralization, which was her area of expertise. And so she measured to what extent was there, I mean, there's a certainly possibility that she would find nothing at all, but she just kind of had a hunch. I wonder if there's been some clay mineralization in the soil, because she knew there's strong energies were there. Yes, indeed, she did find clay mineralization to such a degree that had not been documented in surface soils before. Never had it been seen before in surface soils. In fact, the extent that she found that clay mineralization would be expected if the soil had been exposed or if the sedimentary rock where the soil came from had been exposed for hundreds, if not thousands of years to both heat from the Earth's core and the massive pressure of tons of overlying rock. How is it possible that the energy that created the crop circles affected the soil in this way? It sounds quite like such a strong energy that you would expect the entire landscape to be incinerated. And yet it must be so controlled, the energy must be so brief that it would not have that effect. Iron glaze has also been found coating the plants themselves and stones as well in the soil. This happened in 1993, and the theory, remember the L of BLT, W.C. Levengood, biophysicist, thought that iron from a Pleiades meteor shower was caught in the crop circle making vortex. You know, when it created the crop circle, that energy went right through the meteor shower, fused the iron that brought the iron down and fused it onto the pebbles and plants by instantaneous heat, so brief that it didn't burn the crop. That was his theory. And here's another interesting phenomenon. There's a fellow named Busty Taylor, a pilot who's also a crop circle researcher. He was showing us a slideshow of a video of this. He goes up and takes photos and videos from the air. And as he was showing this film, this particular formation, someone in the audience noticed that you see the line of dots going right across the top right corner. He hadn't even noticed it himself, even though this was his video. But someone from the audience said, "Look, there's a white object that went right across." These are called balls of light, BOLs for short, because they've been seen by so many people. You might as well call them BOLs for short. Give them a handle. Busty Taylor said, "When I showed this video in the audience, there was a commotion, and several people asked to see the shot again. I was gobsmacked, as they say in England, by what I saw." Many people have seen crop circles, incidentally, just hovering above them, and sometimes there might be a couple that they've seen balls of light. There might be a couple of them hovering together in tandem, almost like they're sightseers and enjoying what's the view of the crop circle. Balls of light have also been seen to seemingly create crop circles, or to be at least present while the crop formation is happening. But of course, we have no way of knowing if they were actually participating in the creation, or again, if they were just part of the, shall we say, special effects, because you've already learned about many special effects having to do with light and sound and the like. By the way, speaking of sound, there's often a trilling noise that people hear when they're in crop circle formations, perhaps right after it's happened. It's also been heard before crop circle, the crop circle manifests. And let's remember that mysterious designs don't just happen on crops. They also happen, in this case, concentric snow rings. A gentleman was watching the news in the middle of the night. Suddenly there was a flash of light, blinding flash, almost like daylight, outside. He had no idea what had happened. And then he looked out his window the next day, and that's what he saw. And notice there are two sets of concentric rings. There's the main set that starts in the middle of this photograph, but then at the bottom you'll see a smaller series of concentric circles intersecting or overlying that larger set. In 1992, a group of 7 crop circle researchers thought that they would attempt to communicate non-verbally with the crop circle makers. And it's well known that people often have are able to communicate, often unintentionally, the phenomenon of ESP, extrasensory perception. In this case, they thought, well, maybe if they had an intention of being in touch with the crop circle makers, maybe they would receive some kind of message from them. So they sat down and meditated and were open to whatever might happen. 5 of the 7 saw this pattern, 3 circles with lines attaching them. They saw it very clearly in their mind's eye. In other words, they had received a message to their satisfaction, and they received it in the field the next day. Many crop formations occur near sacred sites. The sacred site that covers most of this photograph is called Avery Stone Circle, a man-made formation that most likely had some sacred significance to people who were living millennia ago. And remember, I mentioned that southern England happens to be where a lot of these special things are happening. And it seems that there's a reason for crop formations happening near these sacred sites. And this one is understandably called the spider's web. And it too has a sophisticated geometrical pattern associated with it that was used to conceptualize it and to construct it. Here we have concentric circles in the sand discovered by a woman named Ilyas, who doused for lines and found there were energy lines that all went into the cave right there on the shore of Hug Point, Oregon. Here we have what looked like celestial bodies. In fact, the one on the lower left represents our own solar system, the metallic planets only, the smaller metallic planets of which we are one, and with an asteroid belt surrounding it. But if you look at the third orbit out, which is our orbit, the Earth is not there. So this has been called the Earth is missing. Perhaps that's a humorous reference to the fact that when you stand on planet Earth, you can't see planet Earth. This one, for understandable reasons, is called the Dna Double Helix. And remember, the sacred sites often being the location for a crop circle. The Julia set is another sophisticated mathematical formula. You can look it up online if you choose. I can't even begin to explain what a Julia set is. But that pattern is, in fact, a mathematical representation of a geometrical representation of that mathematical formula. And this happened to be a formation that was created in daylight, and in fact, there was an eyewitness account. Someone saw a mist about 2 to 3 feet off the ground, spinning around, and on the ground a circular shape was appearing which seemed to get bigger and bigger, and simultaneously the mist got bigger and bigger and swirled faster. And there was a clear space between the ground and the mist. The strangest thing he had ever seen. I'm sure if you saw it, you'd never forget it. And as if that wasn't impressive enough, the triple Julia set, which is not a mathematical equation. It's an artistic expression of the Julia set. Unbelievable scale of this. Huge formation with standing tufts elegantly left in the center of every circle. Once again, Stonehenge is visited in 1997. You see in the lower left-hand corner, and in the upper left corner, a detail or a view from above, give you a better picture of those 6 trees emanating from a central point. So when you see photos and you realize this is 1997, you appreciate how just in a decade, the artistry has developed considerably. We can imagine if I'm sure the beings, the intelligent beings who are doing this, and I'm not going to say who they are because I really don't know for sure, but they certainly seem to be growing in their skills. And I commented earlier that southern England has always been the focal point of crop circles worldwide, and you'll see the green areas there, fissure flow aquifers through chalk. This is the hydrogeology in southern England, And the dots represent about almost 90% of crop formations happen to occur in this area where there's chalk. So what's happening, the theory is that as water is percolating through the chalk, some electromagnetic energy is generated that may account for why sacred sites proliferate in this area of southern England. It might also account for why the formations are happening. Perhaps this energy is used to make the formations, or perhaps simply the artists are honoring that energy that's there. But there are ley lines along this stretching through Great Britain. This is called the I think it's the Matthew line or something. The St. Michael line. Ley lines and sacred sites in southern England, they often are positioned along that line. Well, just to reassure you that yes, United States also is the recipient of crop circles from time to time. Here's one that was near a serpent mound, and the design that you see appeared to be pointing to an ancient Native American serpent mound, which was regarded to be a sacred site for Native Americans. The markings in the field and tail of the mounds are similar, and there were radiation levels and electrical and magnetic fields detected that were higher in that area, inside than outside the design. Now here's another sacred site, I suppose we could say, that hill, Silbury Hill in Wiltshire, with another fractal, in this case putting triangles on the sides of that. You can see the diagrams right there explaining how that was done. But let's have a look at Silbury Hill first and understand that this was a man-made public works project, and wonder, let's address the question of why such an inordinate amount of work was devoted, such a tremendous amount of effort to creating that formation, to moving such a vast quantity of soil and rock. Well, remember the B of Burke Levengood Talbot, BLT research. John Burke wrote a book called Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, and he studied formations like this all over the world, and he said that they were sited where local geology magnified naturally occurring electromagnetic fluctuations, energies which were enhanced by the structures built there. And why would they do such a thing? Because if you brought seeds to the top of these structures and left them there overnight, the electrical activity that was focused by these structures would have the same effect that we already saw with Robert Platt's seeds and the seeds in New York in 1991. So people millennia ago must have known that there was this way to make their seeds more fertile, and in fact they would create these structures at times of scarcity because they needed their seeds to be more fertile than they had been. They had been diminishing yields. So the germination of these maize seedlings here were placed on a pyramid of Tikal during extremely powerful electrical activity with beneficial results. The photograph above is of a strange funnel cloud that was seen right above the formation that had just occurred below, which was the largest expanse of downed plants ever seen to date. That was in 1998. And what a beautiful formation it is. There's a kind of a three-dimensional effect created by the direction of the flow of the plants in the field, the way they're laid down in different directions. You remember the pictogram? Well, the photograph in the left is a super pictogram photographed by Lucy Pringle. All these are Lucy Pringle's photographs from June 1999. And let's meet Lucy Pringle. She had a healing when she went into a formation, and she noticed when she came out that an injury that she had been suffering some pain from, chronic pain for years, had just vanished, and she was completely healed by this crop circle. So she was already quite interested in them, and this certainly intensified her interest. And so she's studied the crop circles for decades now, and she's written books, which I highly recommend. She has her own website also, just search Lucy Pringle. And she's discovered, she's researched effects of electromagnetic fields on living systems, their effects on people after visiting or being in the vicinity of a formation. She's also noticed animal behavior, remote effects, luminosities, mechanical failures, and audio effects. Sometimes people's cameras will just be fried when never to work again, if they're brought into a crop formation. As for people's reactions, they can often be quite unpleasant, as you can see from this list of experiences. But I believe that's fairly unusual, and I think it's more common for people to have much more positive experiences: peace, love, and light, a sense of a presence. Here are some examples of what people have testified, or testimony that they've given. One person said, "Nothing could prepare me for the personal experience of going into a formation. A rather womb-like experience. You're totally safe, totally secure, not limited mentally, emotionally, or spiritually, being able to access other levels of consciousness and other dimensions while in a circle." And one person, at least I think that more than one person has discovered that they could heal, not just be healed, but they had become healers themselves after being in a formation. Lucy Pringle advises not to go into a crop circle if you have a pacemaker or another battery-powered health device because of the strong energies. She also advises if you're pregnant or thinking of becoming pregnant not to go in. And don't take your credit cards with you. They often just don't work. You'll have to have them replaced. On we go to 1999, and that thistle, as you see, is right in the middle of a small circle. And in the larger pattern, you see many such small circles surrounding the larger formation. So you can understand that the formation was sited on that one thistle. It was that thistle was noticed, and then the larger formation was imprinted on such that one thistle would be right in the center of one of those small circles. And left standing, of course, right? Here are more Lucy Pringle photographs. Now you see these are all July 1999. Notice the one in the lower left-hand corner. I'm going to give you a closer look at it. There it is. And beams of light were seen above that crop formation. Here's another one near Silbury Hill in 1999. Another one, remember Barbary Castle, the tetrahedron? July 1999. And then this, the magic basket. I cannot understand how people can seriously say that formations are being hoaxed by people going out in the middle of the night with planks of wood and flattening the crops. I don't think so. You can't do that with planks of wood. Here's a close-up of the magic basket. And here's some more details that have been found. Central standing stalks in the center of circles. Swirled and nested plants, usually in the center of circles. Braided plants. 2001. Truly awe-inspiring. 409 circles there. 900 feet in diameter is the total formation size. And this formation flowed over an undulating landscape, so you wouldn't be able to see parts of it if you're on land, inside the formation. You wouldn't be able to see all of it. Some part of it would be out of your view. And the date of its creation and its latitude and longitude were even encoded into that design. And then in 2001, what people understandably have called the angel, and there's a poppy standing just as the thistle that you saw earlier. But imagine that fragile flower and the plants of wheat just being directed to lay flat, suddenly lying flat all around it, and the poppy still standing unaffected. And now I'd like to show you some formations that are symbolic of various spiritual traditions over the millennia. This is a Buddhist Dharma wheel. The Eightfold Path of Spiritual Development is represented by 8 symbols on that ring. Well, there's 7 symbols, and then there's a water trough. And the water trough is symbolic of purification, one of those one of the eightfold paths, one of those 8 symbols. So the water trough was cleverly included to make it unnecessary to actually represent that 8th symbol. The water trough is the stand-in for that symbol. And in fact, 1 inch of the water was evaporated. You could see the dark line, but much of that water was gone due to the creation of the circle itself. That water evaporated as a consequence of the formation happening. This is the Buddhist endless knot. You can see these lines have no beginning and no ending. This is the menorah, symbol of Judaism, representing there are 6 lamps surrounding the central lamp, which is the light of God. This is the mystical Kabbalistic mystical Judaism, Kabbalistic tree of life. And the cross is actually a universal symbol that predates Christianity. It represents the descent of spirit into matter. What a beautiful cross that is. And it's not the only cross that has been seen. This one, a more recent crop formation. And speaking of Christianity, well, we have these 2 interesting formations that you really don't have any clue what they're about. Here's one, here's the other, until you superimpose them and you discover the Shroud of Turin.
Oh my God.
The yin-yang symbol has also been honored with an appropriately Chinese Oriental motif surrounding it. And here's a 1.5 yin-yangs, right? Or a double yin-yang, and a multiple yin-yang in 2009. Now, in 1974, a radio message was beamed into space that was intended to make contact. There was a possibility that someone out there would see it, and it was just done with it was a binary message with the following information you see on the right: the numbers 1 to 10, various details of the DNA double helix, the graphic figure of the human and the height of the average man, the human population of Earth, the graphic of our solar system, and the graphic of the telescope itself. All of this information was encoded in the radio message. It was thought that it would take perhaps thousands of years. Radio messages are quite slow, after all, not nearly as fast as the speed of light. And of course, stars are light years away. So radio messages to be received and then to be sent back would take a long time. And yet there was a reply just a few decades later. And you'll see in the lower photo in the center, Chilbolton Observatory, the field right near that observatory in southern England. There are 2 formations. One of them is a portrait of a humanoid, and the other looks quite human to us. And the other is a reply to the Arecibo message, and I will encode it for you. I'll interpret it for you, because it was found that rather than carbon being the main element around which their organic chemistry is assuming that this is now a calling card, if you will, of the creators of the crop formation. They are silicon-based, not carbon-based. Our organic chemistry is based around carbon, but theirs is based around silicon. They have DNA that's a triple helix rather than double helix. They are shorter than us, but there are far more of them than us. They live on a planet that's the fourth out, I think, from their sun. And notice in the in the bottom of this, in other words, the lower right corner of this slide, you will see an interesting design, and you will see it again in this photo, which was a formation that happened a year prior to the formation at Chilbolton Observatory that you just saw. And that must be a representation of their, they don't use a telescope like as was used in the Arecibo message. They use this particular, well, I don't know what to call it. Their instrument for sending out messages. And it could have something to do with how crop circles themselves, crop formations themselves are created. Now, I referred earlier to different kinds of messages being received, and in this case, marine light wheels, which virtually no one has heard of, They are luminous mobile light patterns. It's a light show, basically, observed on the open sea, and the red dots show where historically they have happened. And they can be one or more wheels rotating clockwise or counterclockwise, diameter anywhere between 3 and 200 yards, or sometimes virtually stretching out to the horizon. They can be parallel bands or rotating spokes or underwater light rays. They can be underwater or above the surface, or rising from under the water and exploding as balls of light at the surface. Here are some representations. There are no videos of marine light wheels that I'm aware of. But you can picture how people are just spellbound when they watch something like this, including the entire crew of the USS Milius, all 50 people on board this ship. And Commander Kendall Gennick wrote the following letter to Chris Sherwood when one of the people in his crew did some research online and found that Chris Sherwood was a marine light wheels researcher and had reported on this phenomenon already. So they realized that what they had seen was not the first time that it had happened. And he expressed his gratitude to her for doing the research that she was doing. This is one of my favorite formations. And I wish I could show you more, because this is only a sampling after all, and we're looking at 2003, and here we are. That's almost 2 decades ago. Look at those 4 circular man-made dolmens, I think they're called, in a row, and then the crop formation placed right in line with it. Unbelievable detail there. Here's a flower, a mushroom. So they're not always just geometrical, right? A tree and a mushroom connected. The trunk and the stalk are connected, aren't they? And there's something called a mycorrhizal association, which is how it has to do with the symbiosis between the trees and mushrooms. They help each other, basically. And that's an eloquent representation of that symbiosis. Here we have a jellyfish, a dragonfly, and a phoenix, 3 fish. The Nazca lines that happened a couple of millennia ago in bare landscape that was barren and in Peru. And Native Americans at that time created a variety of geometric patterns and designs, and in some cases representations of animals such as this hummingbird. And no one knows why. Perhaps they were worshiping what they believed to be the gods who would honor them and favor them if they gifted the gods with such designs. They, of course, could not see them themselves. They didn't have any means of going up in an airplane and admiring them, but they nonetheless could imagine that they could be seen from space. Another theory is that they could have seen UFOs and were sending a message back to the UFOs in gratitude or with the purpose of communicating with them. But notice in 2009, the photo at the bottom here is a representation of the Nazca style hummingbird, right? An owl, swallows, more swallows. The photo in the top, at the top was actually taken one day, and then the next day, the one at the bottom shows that there were 6 additional swallows added to the first one. 3 on one side, 3 on the other. And this swallow certainly seems to be trailing a message, but no one, to my knowledge, has even approached an explanation for what that means. There's a bird. This seems organic as well, and so does this. But again, snow on ice, or snow patterns. These are both in the Netherlands. And a particularly eloquent one in 2014. This is Morse Code, and it was translated as "No more war." If you start in the middle and then begin in the middle, there's the N, there's the O, and then the M-O-R-E as you circle around in the spiral. No more war was spelled out in Morse code. And incidentally, that was the 70th anniversary of D-Day. Now, another Lucy Pringle photograph there. And so I'm winding up this, this program just to impress on you how amazing not only the overall designs are, but the intricate lay of the crops. The artistry. Oh, I'd like to also credit Steve Alexander. You see the name Steve Alexander there. I highly recommend his photography as well. His website is Temporary Temples. So you can visit his website and see a photo gallery for every year, and he's been doing this for a couple of decades at least. He has beautiful collections of photographs, just stunning photographs, and often show the landscape itself where the formations happen. And this is my final slide. And I believe that these mysterious patterns that we are being gifted with are just that, a gift. I believe that they're intended to help us. I believe that they're intended to give us assurance that we are beautiful beings, that we can be guided if we choose to, that we can, if we choose to realign ourselves with our spiritual traditions, which they often refer to. I believe they are ready to help us even more, perhaps in a vitally practical way. Because after all, I doubt that they need fossil fuels. To them, that would be caveman technology. Would it not behoove us to make connection, to be ready to have the courage to be present with them? Because if we were ready to receive their knowledge, perhaps they could share their technology with us, and perhaps our planet could be saved. But consider the fact that they are not able or willing to make themselves present with us at this time. And that may well be because we need to have true democracy. We need our societies to be actually representative for the people. The people and the planet need to be our priorities, not profit. And as long as profit is the main priority, and as long as the leaders of the respective nations, the great nations in the world, are so set on increasing their profits rather than addressing the welfare and the needs of the people, it seems to me that those are the conditions. That's our first challenge, is to be ready to receive the gifts that they have to offer. But in the meantime, they are certainly giving us a lot of inspiration. They are helping us to touch base with that part of ourselves that appreciates beauty. And therefore, we know that we are beautiful, because if we weren't beautiful, we wouldn't be resonating with the beauty. Do you understand what I'm saying? Incidentally, I'd like to point out that in this heart diagram, if you imagine the heart being oriented the way it typically is, with a point facing downward, the right side of the heart, or the right side of the ring, there's some confetti of the small circles just surrounding the ring on that side, but on the right side only. The left side, which you see here on the bottom and on the right of this image, there are no such confetti. So what is that saying? Is that symbolic of the fact that on the right side of the heart, we need to be on the right side. We need to be practicing, right speech, right thought. The Eightfold Path that was mentioned in that slide of the Buddhist Wheel of Dharma, and perhaps it also has to do with the right side of the brain, which is our more intuitive side, compared to the left side, which is more analytical. In other words, if we tune into our creative side, and our intuitive side, perhaps we're able to be our more authentic selves, our more authentic sacred selves, and to be more consistently loving and accepting of ourselves, loving ourselves and loving other people. So I can end my presentation with that message, and thank you for joining me. So I'm wondering, yeah, you can go ahead and pause. And I'm wondering, are there any observations, any impressions, any questions? Questions, of course, may not be answerable, but I'll do my best.
So
How long does one of those formations?
People often ask that question, and what you have to appreciate is that these are in crops. And even if farmers did not harvest the crops, which sometimes they do, immediately. In fact, it has happened on occasion that farmers have been paid to immediately harvest their crops. There is this whole drama happening where the powers that be don't want us to appreciate these crop formations. They don't want us to it's not in their interests for us to believe in them, quote unquote, to acknowledge that they have, this is a roundabout way of replying to your message, because your question, because after all, even if they leave, the crop will die. Mm-hmm. So that it's not going to last any more than the growing season. But the point I wanted to make about, there have been hoaxes that were clearly done by the military to just spread disinformation or to make people doubt the formation. It's not in the interests of the power elite for us to be open to the knowledge and wisdom of crop circle makers, because we might not then be loyal subjects. We might not then accept the authority of the powers that be. Their credibility is actually, after all, challenged by the fact that they can't explain this. So if they were to acknowledge it, they'd have to acknowledge also that they're not the smartest beings, that there's another authority above them. And they don't want to do that. And they also, you can be sure, are trying to find out as much as they can, but they're not going to let us know that. Mm-hmm. I have noticed that when I share about this phenomenon with people with a scientific background, they are often highly suspicious, highly resistant. They don't want to know the facts, basically. There's just a real block. And scientists often have this kind of, it's a good thing that, to trust your senses and to trust research and all that. But there's a lot that scientists can't explain, and that doesn't mean that it's not real. And they can't explain this phenomenon. So, if you were to have the courage, as Burke, Levengood, and Talbot have, to research this, but if you were part of a university faculty, you could kiss tenure goodbye. You're not going to be considered to be a serious scientist. You'd be considered fringe, and your sanity would be questioned. So it's the groupthink kind of thing, and I commend your courage to even be here. If you were to share, just imagine different members of your family or friends or people you know, and sharing what you saw, and sharing if you in fact agree with me that people are not capable of creating these, and we have to look elsewhere, perhaps those beings who replied in the Chilbolton Formation and described where they came from and described their biology. People often laugh at those who believe in UFOs, right? Even though uncountable thousands of people have seen UFOs, there's so much evidence that it's a real phenomenon. And you can't deny that crop formations are happening. Thousands of them have happened with this kind of sophistication. They're just, it can't be a human conspiracy. There's just no way.
Is there a year or two when there aren't as many?
Yes, and this is such a year. There have only been about 15 this year. And in the heyday, there would be like a couple hundred in a year. And so it's attenuating. And I don't know could it be that it'll end?
It's almost over.
I know. Could it be that they're going to end at some point? I doubt it. I certainly hope not.
Maybe they've given up on us because our world's such a mess.
Well, that's one possibility, but another way to look at it is they've already said it all. I mean, it's there. You know, if you want to learn about the crop formations, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
Just going back and I mean, I've just given you a taste of it. This is just a small amount. You know, if you want to see more formations, you go to Steve Alexander's website, go to Lucy Pringle's website. You're in for hours of fascination and you know, like just hours and hours, and then of course learning about them, because there's so much to learn about them.
And another one are they more apt to be on hay fields or
There are
cornfields, or is there a
wheat,
preference?
barley. There's a crop called rapeseed
So
in the
preference for
spring.
white.
There is no preference. There have been a number of crops, and keep in mind, if you look at the larger concept of pteroglyphs, they're not just in crops either.
No, that's true.
There's the snow, there's the ice, there's the dry lake bed in Oregon, there's the marine light wheels. All of these, in my opinion, are otherworldly in origin. Now, you know, I mentioned UFOs and you know, I prefer to refer them as extraterrestrials. I think that's a more dignified term than aliens.
Yes, I agree.
And I mean, you know, we have problems with racism, just, you know, being able to be comfortable with other people you know, let alone other beings who are not humanoids. But also, is it possible that angels are doing this?
Right.
You know, why not? I mean, I believe in angels. I mean, there are a number of well-documented cases of people, flesh and blood people, appearing just at the right moment to help people in crisis, and then leaving immediately, and other people, no, I didn't see that person.
Right.
You know, I mean, there are so many unexplained things that happen in our.
It's amazing to me how nobody sees this happen. I mean, except for a few.
It's
'Cause some of them
you.
had house
I hope you feel. I hope you feel insulted and enraged at the media. Really, you know, like the people who know darn well these are happening, but have chosen not to tell you.
Oh.
You know, people who control the media.
Seen it and don't want to.
People who control the media.
Right.
You know, the TV, movies, newspapers, magazines, internet. Yes, you can find them, but mainstream media is corporate owned,
Right.
and corporate owned media does not want you to see. You know, they consistently debunk this phenomenon. Look it up under Wikipedia. It's a mainstream. They debunk it, and they don't even address all the things that I've been talking about. You know.
Because I was talking to somebody earlier today, I was going to go see the crop circle presentation. What's that?
Yeah, exactly. What's that? Exactly. Yeah.
What's that?
What's that? And you wouldn't believe how many people still think that Doug and Dave did it.
Right.
They don't even know that it's still happening.
Right.
Okay, they don't know that it's still happening.
Right.
And one, you know, Doug and Dave are not still doing anything. You know,
Right.
one of them has passed already. So,
Right.
and in fact, there's considerable evidence that they were paid to confess.
Oh, I'm sure.
Paid by, yeah.
I'm sure.
That was the disinformation, part of the disinformation campaign.
Fascinating.
Absolutely wonderful.
So
Thank you
we have a
so
right
much.
to know the truth, don't we?
Yes.
And in fact, it's not just out of curiosity or even inspiration. It could well mean whether we can save this planet,
Yeah.
right?
You're right.
Is to be open in that way to the truth.
You're right.
And there's so many other things that mainstream media doesn't want you to know about, also having to do with what really happened at different times in history, or even the present. You know, the background story that they don't want you to know about, and they're just giving you propaganda, what they want you to know about, so that you'll continue to be a loyal subject and support their agenda. Yeah.
Go